So welcome in, everybody. Pardon any background noises. We have a couple new kittens here and they are feeling very playful right now. But today we're going to be talking about maximizing your water use with micro-irrigation. So for those who are just joining, my name is Jackie Leibowitz. I'm the Water Resources Program Assistant at IFAS Extension, Sarasota County. And with me, we have Abby Turna, Wimma Holly, and Earl Varn. So all of us are going to do our best to tell you the perks of micro-irrigation and how it can work for your system. So we're going to start off with a brief overview of micro-irrigation. Then we're going to go over just a couple rules and regulations, and then some tips and resources, as well as just a little bit about how to install a system as well. So our first question to investigate is, what makes it micro-irrigation? So I know we have people from different backgrounds and knowledge, but I figured we'd just go ahead and get everyone on the same page and just start with a brief overview of micro-irrigation. So I'm guessing you're all already familiar with standard irrigation practices. So some of the sprinkler systems you see around the neighborhood or that you probably have in your own yard. So statistics show that the typical homeowner may use 50% or more of the home's total water consumption for irrigation. Now that's a lot of water that goes toward keeping your turf green. But you might be wondering about your landscape beds or container plants. Do they need to be watered every week? Well, it turns out that a lot of Florida native plants and plants that are adapted to the local climate don't need supplemental irrigation for most of the year. In fact, overwatering these plants can lead to disease, runoff, and a generally unhealthy landscape. So how do we set up our plants for success? Well, you may have already guessed it, but a great way to keep plants getting exactly the amount of water they need delivered directly to their roots is micro-irrigation. So micro-irrigation, as the name implies, delivers a small, consistent amount of water directly to plant roots as needed. It uses a combination of low pressure and flow to deliver a maximum of 30 gallons per hour. So the typical sprinkler uses, in contrast, 180 gallons per hour. As you can imagine, this is a big water saver and a much more sustainable choice for landscape plants. So we've talked about how converting to micro-irrigation can save you a lot of water, but let's give an example. So let's say you had 10 spray heads on shrub risers in your yard, and there's a little picture for reference on the slide, and they're watering your bushes. So a typical spray head is going to be putting out about 2.5 gallons per minute. So if you run the system for 30 minutes, which is kind of a standard, that's 750 gallons for every application. So if you retrofitted your system to include drip tubing for those shrubs, let's say you did 100 feet, that's 1 gallon per foot per hour being emitted. So you're dealing with a 50 gallon per application compared to 750. That's a savings of 700 gallons per week. So if you look at it yearly, that's 36,400 gallons in a year, and you're only converting 10 sprinklers. So imagine a whole community converting to drip and the savings that would bring. So micro-irrigation is such a great idea because not only does it reduce your water consumption, but it cuts down on overwatering and makes sure plants get exactly what they need to grow and thrive. By using just what's needed, plants are encouraged to grow long, healthy roots, leading to better stability in the soil, the ability to access water at different soil depths, and general resistance to drought-like conditions. So speaking of drought, here's a map of Florida from this past spring. All throughout April, we experienced moderate drought throughout most of the state, including Sarasota County. So while turf will require near weekly sprinkler irrigation during these hot, dry months, we can count on our landscape plants to hold up to the heat. Micro-irrigation is a super tactic when it comes to keeping plants hardy and healthy during our dry season and during any potential drought conditions. So besides making plants more drought resistant and using less water, what are some of the other pros of micro-irrigation? And are there any downsides? Well, it's easy to say that the positives outweigh the negatives. Micro-irrigation applies water exactly where it's needed, as we've mentioned before, as opposed to sprinklers that spray in a one-size-fits-all pattern above wide patches of grass. That means little water gets lost to evaporation from the hot sun or wind drift. So micro-irrigation systems are relatively easy to set up and hook up to your irrigation system's controller. And a big part of what makes micro-irrigation such a winner is its affordability. For those setting up their own systems, the individual parts that are used in micro-irrigation are pretty cheap and will save you big on water in the long term, so it's definitely a good investment. So as for cons, there aren't many, but it's worth talking about them to make sure that micro-irrigation is the right fit for you and your landscape. So first of all, micro-irrigation isn't going to cut it when it comes to turf. You could, if you really felt like it, take the time to install a bunch of underground drip line weaving through your entire yard, but it would be time consuming, pretty expensive, and not very effective. So that being said, it is always a great choice for landscape beds and container plants. So given that Florida homes have multiple beds and containers, one thing to keep in mind is that the installer is going to have to plan for setting up multiple emitters in multiple locations. But once you get the hang of it, it's relatively easy to make those connections and to keep them organized. But definitely plan for a little work if you do decide to go the micro-irrigation route. Finally, the last con is that the drip tubing connecting emitters to the main source of water can sometimes be hard to disguise, definitely depending on what product you get. This can be dealt with by picking out a natural or unassuming color of drip tubing. Black and brown, which are actually pretty common colors for drip tubing, are usually good choices for the landscape, but you can also find tubing in other colors as well. So, as I mentioned before, there are 4 main types of micro-irrigation. In the order of this picture, starting from the left, we have a micro bubbler, inline drip tubing, a drip emitter, and a micro sprayer. So these are all good for different types of settings in your home garden or landscape. Micro bubblers are a great choice for container plants and plants that are still getting established in landscape beds. They still use low pressure, but they emit water from all points at the head. And this allows a wider spread of water to be distributed to plant roots. They do have the highest flow of all micro-irrigation options, but it's still much lower than a traditional sprinkler head. Inline drip is a great choice for larger plant beds, so it can be buried underground, making it easy to disguise in soil and mulch. One type of tubing required for this type of micro-irrigation is called emitter tubing. It has little holes that are evenly spaced throughout the length of the tube, and this can come in a variety of different setups. So you can have it where it's 12 or 36. It really depends on what you want to get for your garden. But it's important to line these holes up with the plant roots that need regular watering. So this tubing is usually brown in color, and then black polyethylene tubing is a popular choice for drip irrigation as well. This one comes without holes, but holes can be punched using a special tool called, you'd never guess it, a hole punch. And then you can use smaller spaghetti tubing and emitters, and you can add them to the holes for a more custom setup. So, third from the left, we have a typical drip emitter attached to the mainline drip through spaghetti tubing, which is what I was talking about just now. So these emitters are useful for increasing the range of watering in these micro-irrigation systems. Spaghetti tubing is also good for connecting the emitters and container plants to the irrigation water source. So before soil is added to the containers, you can actually thread the tubing through the bottom of the pot to reduce visibility and exposure of the tubing. So finally, we have micro sprays. So micro sprays take on a similar functionality to a sprinkler. They have to be above ground and can deliver water up to 8 feet, which is actually pretty impressive. While a spray cannot reach large distances like regular sprinklers, they do have the longest range of any micro-irrigation emitter. So microsprays do best in gardens when you have a mix of planting beds set up next to each other. All right, so now that we have a better idea of what micro-irrigation is, why it's a great choice for home landscapes, and the different types of emitters, how often can we use it with our county's watering restrictions? So our district, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, offers some general watering guidelines for counties and cities within those counties to follow. But beyond following district rules, these counties and municipalities can add their own watering restrictions for residents to follow. So most of you may be familiar, at least residents of unincorporated Sarasota County, you can only water once per week on your designated watering day. So addresses ending in an even number water on Tuesday, and addresses ending in an odd number have to water on Thursday. During the day, sprinklers can be turned on from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if you want to make any kind of adjustment to that time, you have to sign a petition for variance and send it into the correct entity. So this just applies to the residents of unincorporated Sarasota County, but there's watering restrictions for pretty much every area in Sarasota. So for instance, City of Sarasota and Northport, they can water twice per week following the same or similar rules. Now this rule, these watering restrictions mainly apply to sprinkler irrigation. So here's where it gets fun. When it comes to micro-irrigation and hand watering, all parts of Sarasota County, as advised by the district, don't have any time restrictions. So that means micro-irrigation systems can run at any time and on any day. The only real restriction that systems must follow, you can't really allow more than 3/4 of an inch of water in any irrigation zone on a given day. So given the low flow rate and pressure of these systems, this amount of water is not really likely to be reached. But if you have a broken or poorly maintained system, there's a potential for leakage, and you can't really control the amount of water that gets put out in that case. So it is important to make sure that you are maintaining your systems. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Earl Varn, Master Gardener, and he is going to talk a little bit about installing a micro-irrigation system.
There's two ways that you can convert your system if you want. And what we've done is we've showed the initial one we're showing comes from actually a hose spigot. But even though this design comes from a hose spigot, this would be almost the identical type of design that you would use if you were converting, for example, spray head risers that come up in your shrubs. When we do irrigation evaluations, Wilma and I go out, well, we haven't recently, but previously we would go out quite a few times in a month to various homes and do irrigation evaluations. And what we noticed with a lot of the houses are that the spray head risers come up inside the shrubs. And what happens is when these homes are built and the irrigation is initially put in, it's not put in far enough away from the foundation of the house. So then what happens after shrubs are planted, the shrubs mature, and then these shrubs grow up, and the shrub risers are inside the shrubs. In fact, I can tell you, I built my house 4 years ago, and they put the irrigation in, and within 3 years, my shrubs were already encroaching onto my sprinklers. So I ended up having to move those sprinklers out away from the planting beds. So what you would do is you could come up out of the ground, and it is a very simple process. You come up out of the ground and you would connect just like shown here with a hose bib. You can connect to a single shrub riser, and what you would do is you would cap off the other shrub risers. For example, if you had 10 shrub risers in a zone, you would cap off 9 of them and just use the one to convert over to drip tubing. So what you need to do is you need to start off with your source, and your source in the example I just gave is a particular zone where you have shrub risers. And then what you do is you put in, this talks about a backflow prevention device. You only use a backflow prevention device on your initial source. You wouldn't, in my example, use a backflow prevention device. That has to be used when you're connecting to city or county water. Any type of water that could flow back into a drinkable source, you have to have a backflow prevention device. However, if you're converting a zone inside your current house, your current property, then you would not likely have to use a backflow. There should already be one in place elsewhere. And then the filter is important. And the reason it's important is because depending on your source, your sprinklers and your drip tubing could get clogged up by the debris in the line. In our area, I live in an HOA, and our source of water is reclaimed water that's pumped into a lake. and then they pull it back out of the lake. And then when they do that, they pull up a lot of debris. It is not unusual at all for within a few months to have your sprinklers clogged, and which would also clog up your drip emitters and your drip tubing. So in this example here, they show an adapter. That's just a hose adapter that goes from the actual hose adapter to the drip tubing. Okay, whether or not it's the black pipe, which I call funny pipe. I think that Jackie called it polypropylene. Is that what you called it? In any event,
polyethylene.
Polyethylene. Okay. In any event, either one of those, you're going to have an adapter on when you're coming out of a hose spigot. You don't have to have that when you're coming out of your PVC for your shrub riser. Then you just then it literally snaps in place. It's compression fittings in most instances. Sometimes you might have to use a 5/8" stainless steel hose clamp, and then you just lay it out. I mean, you just lay it out. It is that simple. And you know, you weave it in and out of your shrubs, or you just lay it up close to your shrubs. Now, the distance is normally about 12 inches on a drip tube for shrubs. And that's going to provide plenty of water to your shrubs. Now, one thing that you'll want to do is, especially in a lot of instances where you have shrub risers, that zone is also part of your turf grass zone. So you may have mixed, and we see mixed all the time. And what I mean by mixed is you have shrub risers and sprinklers sprinkling your turf. And so what you want to do is, if you're in that situation, then what you do is, and it's very simple, you put a shutoff valve. And you put a shutoff valve right after it comes out of the ground. And that way what you can do is you can turn that off, because once your plants and shrubs are established, they don't need the water. In fact, Wilma will tell you that when we go out to these houses, because they have these shrub risers inside the shrubs, a lot of the shrubs are damaged just by the sheer fact that they're just getting watered way too much. And generally we can just walk up to a house and we can look and see the condition of the shrubs, and we have a general pretty good idea that there's shrub risers in there that's damaging those shrubs. So now for installing a system, now this is actually a perfect system here. The one you're looking at now is if you're going to start from scratch, or if you're going to put in or install a new zone, this is the way you're going to want to go. And again, the backflow prevention device, you may or may not need that. And the isolation valve that they have here is actually the shutoff valve that I talked about. Now this is all inside. If you look at the brown is the dirt or the soil, as Dr. Pat likes to say. And the isolation valve is what I call a shutoff valve. And you do want to have a shutoff valve in this type of situation, because if you ever have to work on anything that's to the right of this, you need to be able to shut the source off. You've got to shut the water off. So you've got your filter in line there, then you have your pressure regulation device. Now that's important. If you have, you know, I've seen converted zones where there's a lot of sprinklers in a zone and shrub risers in a zone where they don't put in a pressure regulation device, and that's because there is so much other ways for the pressure to be reduced by the other sprinklers. But that's something that you really do need to pay attention to, because if your pressure is too high, it can blow out your system, and you certainly don't want to have that happen. Now, in this example here, you know, you've got the irrigation control valve. It's always important to know where those are at, and I strongly recommend to anybody that's watching this to make sure you find those in your yard, and also make sure that you uncover them, keep them uncovered. Don't let grass or don't let weeds grow over top of your boxes, because if we can't find the boxes, we can't do any work on the yard. So that's very, very important. So that's pretty much it. Talking about the drip emitter tubing, and you know that it's above ground and stuff, you can pretty much cover it up for the most part with mulch in most situations. Sometimes you just can't, and it's going to be visible. But anyways, that's it, and it really is. It's a very simple process, and you can YouTube it. You can find it out there on YouTube, and it just simple process.
Yeah, very true. Great job on describing that, Earl, and especially about the valve boxes. It's really important that you keep a track of where those are and make sure there isn't overgrowth, because that way, when you do get your system maintained, either if you're doing it or you're getting someone else to come in, you know, it's a much easier process. So with that said, we have a few tips and tricks to give you before we let you go for today. So first of all, kind of going off of what I was saying just now, keep your system maintained regularly. So clean filters as you need to and take care of leaks when they happen. After all, there's no use wasting water with a system that's supposed to keep your water use low. Don't be afraid to experiment with different sizes of tubing. Distribution tubing is great for getting water to a variety of places, and spaghetti tubing can help get water from the distribution tubes into the container plants and deliver water directly to your plant roots. Don't be afraid to switch out emitters too if your plants are getting too much or too little water. It's usually as simple as just replacing the part. If you find yourself making some mistakes when punching holes in your tubing, don't fret, all is not lost. You can invest in something called goof plugs to fix up problem areas in your tubing. So evaluating your yard's irrigation system can be a helpful step for figuring out exactly where micro-irrigation would be a good fit. So you can get your hands on an aerial image of your property, and from there you can mark where your existing sprinklers and components are, and that will help you keep track of where everything is located and be an extremely handy reference for system maintenance. Another thing is to not be afraid to ask for help. So seasoned professionals might be able to install a micro-irrigation system with no sweat, but most people who are new to the game will probably need an extra set of hands to help locate components, hold parts, and provide emotional support. So our last big tip is to read product descriptions thoroughly when you're buying new components for your system. Make sure that the pieces you buy fit snugly in the diameter of your tubing. And then we have a few resources for you as well. First is our handy dandy 73-page guide to micro-irrigation in West Central Florida. So this masterpiece from Tampa Bay Water has a thorough breakdown of system components as well as how to integrate micro-irrigation into specific parts of your landscape. For a simple but effective guide to residential micro-irrigation, you can look no further than the IFAS publication, Micro-Irrigation for Home Landscapes from Ann Yasalanis and Michael Dukes. When it comes to irrigation newbies, we recommend starting with a drip irrigation kit. Some companies and stores offer a combination of supplies in these convenient kits to help you get started on putting together a micro-irrigation system for your home landscape. If you're looking for a more specific setup, these kits may not work for your needs. So, it's worth having a conversation with an irrigation professional too to figure out exactly the best way to go for your home landscape. And of course, we are also a resource, so you can always get in touch with us for any irrigation, micro-irrigation, or water-related questions. Our office number is up on the screen, but I'll go ahead and post it in the chat as well. And with that, I think it's time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, we can go ahead and try it where if you unmute your mic and ask, one at a time would be great, but you can also post in the chat if you have any questions and don't feel like speaking up today. So the choice is yours. And yeah, we have a few minutes to answer any questions. So. Oh, and I think actually we had one earlier about soaker hose versus drip tape. So I don't know if Earl, you have any insight?
Sure. The drip line is going to be far more efficient. Soaker hose is going to put out a lot more water, and a lot of times that puts it out where you don't need it because it starts at the beginning and it ends at the end. The other thing about a soaker hose is I can tell you those things will rot, and it doesn't take too much time while those are exposed to sun before they'll rot, and you may turn them on, and we've actually seen this. Where somebody turns their system on and you see water just shooting out and you're like, where's that coming from? And you walk over there and they've got a soaker hose buried. You knock back the mulch and there it is. There's a soaker hose and it's got a big hole in it somewhere. So that would be the actual last resort. But if that's your last resort, if that's all you can use, then that's what you just use. Abby, you got any ideas on that, or Wilma?
Yeah, that would be a good temporary resort if you were just needing something for a little while to get something established and only plan on using it for a month or something like that, then that would be okay. But it's nowhere near as permanent as the micro irrigation.
Yeah, I think the important point that I'd like to make is don't be intimidated by it, because it is not a hard process. I mean, and especially once you get in your first zone, or you convert your first zone, you just sit there and you go, wow, that's really simple. That is not hard at all. As far as like punching holes in the tubing that you would need to do, it is easier than taking a hole punch and punching a hole of paper. It's got just a little tool with a little pointy end to it, and you just pop it in the plastic tube, and the fittings just snap right in. And as Jackie said, if you make a mistake, it's no big deal at all, because they have little tiny goof plugs, and those just snap right in too. So I would just recommend that people just not be intimidated by thinking that, oh, well, this is going to be really hard to do, because it's not. It's very simple. I mean, anybody can do it. I really feel like that. You know, you don't have to be a handy guy to do that. Anybody can do that, a handy, person. So.
Yeah, brilliantly said. And I will also add, it is perfect weather for any kind of outdoor projects right now. So if you're looking for something to do and you're not feeling like going out anywhere, which I would not blame you in the least, you can pick up some, micro irrigation supplies curbside and get going in your home landscape. Thank you everybody for showing up today, for the great questions and insight. Looking forward to seeing you again in future webinars.